What happens when Hollywood's most respected actor meets late-night television's most notorious interrogator? You won't believe what unfolds when Denzel Washington sits down with Stephen Colbert for what was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance. Instead, viewers witnessed one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history, culminating in a dramatic walkout that left the studio audience in stunned silence. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below because you're not going to believe what unfolds. Last night's episode of The Late Show started innocuously enough. Denzel Washington, promoting his latest directorial effort, walked onto the set with his characteristic confident stride, flashing that million-dollar smile that has captivated audiences for decades. The audience erupted in applause as he settled into the guest chair, seemingly ready for another typical late-night chat. But what transpired over the next 25 minutes would become the stuff of television legend. The trouble began almost immediately after the commercial break. Colbert, known for his sharp political commentary and increasingly confrontational interview style, had clearly done his homework. But this wasn't the respectful preparation of a seasoned host honoring a distinguished guest. This was an ambush in the making. "Denzel, welcome back to the show," Colbert began, his trademark smirk already playing at the corners of his mouth. "You know, I've been thinking about your career lately, and I have to ask about something that's been bothering me." Washington, ever the professional, maintained his composure. "Ask away, Stephen. I'm an open book." "Well, that's interesting you say that because your recent comments about the media and Hollywood have been, let's say, thought-provoking." Colbert leaned forward, his tone shifting from welcoming to prosecutorial. "You've been pretty critical of what you call the manufactured narratives in entertainment journalism. Some might say you're being a bit hypocritical, considering you've benefited enormously from that same system." The studio audience, sensing the sudden shift in energy, grew noticeably quieter. Washington's smile flickered for just a moment before returning to full wattage. But those who knew him well could see the steel beginning to show in his eyes. "I wouldn't call it hypocritical, Stephen. I'd call it honest. There's a difference between appreciating opportunities and staying silent when you see an industry losing its way." Washington's voice remained steady, but there was an edge creeping in. "I've been in this business for over 4 decades. I've seen how the game is played, and I've seen what happens when people prioritize clicks and controversy over truth and substance." Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed energized by Washington's pushback. "But isn't that exactly what you're doing right now? I mean, here you are on my show promoting your movie. Aren't you participating in the very system you're criticizing? Using the platform when it benefits you, then condemning it when it doesn't align with your personal beliefs." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Washington shifted in his chair, his posture straightening as he processed what was happening. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was an interrogation. "Stephen, with all due respect, I think you're mischaracterizing what I've said." Washington's voice had dropped to that dangerous quiet that anyone who had worked with him recognized as a warning sign. "I've never condemned the entire industry. What I've criticized is the tendency to sensationalize, to create controversy where none exists, to prioritize entertainment value over journalistic integrity." Journalistic integrity. Colbert's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. That's rich coming from someone who's made millions playing make-believe for a living. "Tell me, Denzel, when you're up there on screen pretending to be someone else, where exactly does your integrity factor into that equation?" The studio audience began to murmur uncomfortably. Even Colbert's most loyal fans could sense that their host had crossed a line. This wasn't clever banter or insightful commentary. This was a personal attack disguised as legitimate questioning. Washington's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a man known for his controlled performances and measured public statements, the slight tell was equivalent to a volcanic eruption from anyone else. "You know what, Stephen? I think I see what's happening here." Washington's voice had taken on a new quality. Not louder, but somehow more commanding. "You've decided that instead of having a conversation about my work, about the film I'm here to discuss, you'd rather turn this into some kind of gotcha moment for your audience. You want to create a spectacle." "I'm just asking questions that I think viewers want answered," Colbert shot back, his smile becoming more forced with each exchange. "You've positioned yourself as this moral authority in Hollywood, but you're still cashing those studio checks. You're still playing the game you claim to despise. I'm just wondering how you reconcile that contradiction. The tension in the studio had become palpable. Audience members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, some beginning to look toward the exits. The camera operators were getting shots they'd never expected to capture. And in the control room, producers were frantically trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let the confrontation play out. Washington stood up slightly, then settled back into his chair with deliberate control. When he spoke again, his words carried the weight of 4 decades in an industry that had tried to break lesser men. Let me tell you something about reconciliation, Stephen. Every day I reconcile being an artist with being a businessman. Every day I reconcile wanting to tell meaningful stories with the reality of commercial film. But what I don't have to reconcile is being honest about what I see happening in this industry, even if that honesty makes some people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable? Colbert's voice rose slightly, his composure beginning to crack. Is that what you think this is about? Making me uncomfortable? Denzel, you've been taking shots at late-night television, at comedy, at the very format we're sitting in right now, and then you come on my show expecting what, exactly? A free pass? A platform to promote your movie without any pushback? The accusation hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Washington's expression had gone from professional courtesy to something approaching genuine anger, though he maintained the kind of controlled fury that had made him one of the most compelling actors of his generation. "I expect basic respect," Washington said, his voice cutting through the studio like a blade. "The same respect I've shown every interviewer, every journalist, every talk show host I've sat across from in 40 years of doing this job." But apparently that's too much to ask. The stage was set for something unprecedented. 2 titans of their respective crafts locked in a battle of wills that neither seemed prepared to lose. And as the commercial break music began to swell, viewers could sense that what they had witnessed so far was only the beginning. During the commercial break, the atmosphere backstage was electric with tension. Producers huddled together, whispering frantically about damage control. Washington sat motionless in his chair, his eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the cameras, while Colbert paced behind his desk like a predator preparing for the kill. The audience, still buzzing with nervous energy, had no idea that the worst was yet to come. When the cameras rolled again, Colbert's demeanor had shifted. Gone was any pretense of jovial host welcoming a beloved guest. In its place was something colder, more calculated. The look of a man who had decided to burn bridges rather than build them. "And we're back with Denzel Washington," Colbert announced to the cameras, his smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Before the break, we were discussing your recent criticisms of the entertainment industry, but I want to dig deeper into something specific you said last month at the AFI tribute." Washington's posture stiffened. He knew exactly what was coming, and viewers could see the recognition flash across his features like lightning before a storm. "You made some pretty pointed comments about how certain segments of the media, and I'm paraphrasing here, manufacture outrage for profit while hiding behind the mask of social responsibility." That was quite a mouthful, Denzel. Almost sounds like you had someone specific in mind. The gauntlet wasn't just thrown now, it was hurled with surgical precision. Washington's hands, which had been resting calmly on the arms of his chair, slowly clenched into fists. "Stephen, if you're asking me to name names, you're going to be disappointed. I speak in principles, not personalities." His voice had dropped to that dangerous register that co-stars and directors had learned to recognize as a red alert. "But since you brought it up, let me be crystal clear about something. When entertainers masquerade as journalists, when comedy becomes a weapon instead of a mirror, when platforms are used to tear people down rather than build understanding, yes, I have a problem with that." The studio had gone dead silent. Even the camera operators seemed to be holding their breath. Colbert's face had flushed slightly and his trademark smirk had transformed into something uglier. "Masquerade as journalists." Colbert's voice rose an octave. "That's interesting coming from someone who's never spent a day in a newsroom, never broken a story, never had to meet a deadline under pressure. Tell me, Denzel, what exactly qualifies you to lecture the rest of us about journalistic integrity? Your Oscar, your box office receipts?" It was a direct hit, and everyone in the studio knew it. Washington's eyes flashed with something that transcended professional disagreement and entered the realm of genuine fury. "What qualifies me," Washington said, each word measured and deliberate, "is watching talented people, real journalists, real entertainers, Real artists get pushed aside by blowhards who think a clever quip is the same as actual insight. What qualifies me is seeing this industry I love turned into a circus where the loudest voice wins, regardless of whether they have anything worthwhile to say. The personal nature of the attack was unmistakable. Colbert's face had gone from flushed to pale, and his hands were now gripping the edge of his desk with visible tension. A circus? Colbert's voice had taken on a dangerous edge. Well, if this is a circus, Denzel, then what does that make you? The dancing bear? The trained seal? Because from where I'm sitting, you've been performing for Hollywood's establishment for decades, telling them exactly what they want to hear, playing it safe, never taking real risks. The accusation hung in the air like a poison cloud. Washington had been called many things in his career: demanding, perfectionist, intense, but never safe, never a sellout. The insult struck at the very core of his artistic identity. Safe? Washington's voice had gone quiet again, but now it carried an undercurrent of barely controlled rage. You want to talk about safe, Stephen? Let's talk about hiding behind a desk and taking cheap shots at people who actually put themselves on the line. Let's talk about building a career on sarcasm and cynicism while contributing absolutely nothing of value to the conversation. The audience had gone from uncomfortable to genuinely distressed. Some were looking around for exits. Others were recording on their phones, sensing they were witnessing television history, though not the kind anyone would want to be remembered for. Colbert stood up from his desk, a move that was both theatrical and genuinely threatening. Contributing nothing of value. I've been holding powerful people accountable for years, while you've been playing dress-up and collecting paychecks from the same studios you now claim to criticize. At least I'm honest about what I do. Honest? Washington laughed. But there was no humor in it. You hide behind comedy every time someone calls you out for being wrong. You attack people's character, their integrity, their life's work, and then claim it's all just entertainment when the consequences come home to roost. That's not honest, Stephen. That's cowardly. The word cowardly hit Colbert like a physical blow. His entire body tensed, and for a moment, it seemed like he might actually leave his position behind the desk. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point, with audience members beginning to whisper among themselves, clearly disturbed by what they were witnessing. Cowardly? Colbert's voice was now shaking with anger. I face criticism every single night. I put my opinions out there for millions of people to judge. What do you do, Denzel? You hide behind carefully crafted public relations campaigns and sanitized interviews. You've spent 40 years being Hollywood's good guy, their safe choice, their dependable product. Washington stood up from his chair, towering over the set with an authority that made everyone in the studio suddenly remember they were in the presence of one of the most powerful figures in entertainment. Product. His voice filled the studio without him raising it. Is that what you think I am? A product. Let me tell you something about being a product, Stephen. A product does what it's told. A product stays quiet when it sees injustice. A product doesn't call out people like you when they're tearing down everything this industry should stand for. But neither man was backing down. If anything, they seemed to be feeding off each other's fury, every insult sparking an even sharper response. The audience was openly uncomfortable now. Some stood to leave, while others sat frozen, unable to look away from the spectacle unfolding before them. As Washington's words echoed through the studio, it was clear to everyone that they were witnessing a moment that would define both men's legacies in ways neither could have anticipated. Colbert's face had twisted into something unrecognizable from the genial host millions were used to seeing. The mask was gone, replaced by something raw and desperate. He stepped out from behind his desk, abandoning the last traces of professional decorum. You know what your real problem is, Denzel? Colbert's voice trembled with barely contained rage. You can't stand that the world has moved on from your kind of Hollywood royalty. You're a relic, a dinosaur clinging to some outdated notion of dignity and respect that died with the studio system. The insult landed like a blow. Even the production crew visible in the background seemed to recoil. Washington's expression shifted from anger to disbelief. He had faced decades of criticism, setbacks, and politics, but he had never been dismissed so thoroughly, so cruelly, in such a public space. A dinosaur? Washington's voice was deadly quiet. He took a step closer. Colbert instinctively backed away. Let me tell you about dinosaurs, Stephen. Dinosaurs built this industry. Dinosaurs created the foundation that allows people like you to make a living tearing things down instead of building them up. Building them up? Colbert laughed bitterly. You mean protecting them? Covering for them? Looking the other way when it's convenient? That's what your generation did, Denzel. You built a system where image mattered more than truth, where the facade was more important than real progress. The accusation sucked the oxygen out of the room. Washington stood perfectly still, processing the weight of what had just been said. When he spoke again, his voice carried a gravity that silenced even the restless whispers. You don't know what you're talking about, he said slowly. You sit behind your desk every night, making jokes about people's lives, their work, their failures, and you think that gives you insight into who they are. You think cynicism is wisdom. You think tearing people down is the same as holding them accountable. Colbert had backed against his desk, but his mouth kept moving. At least I don't pretend to be something I'm not. At least I don't wrap myself in false dignity while playing the same games as everyone else. You want to talk about facades? Your entire career has been one carefully constructed facade. Enough! The word cracked through the air like a thunderclap. Washington's control had shifted from restraint to power. I've sat here and listened to you insult my work, my integrity, my life's dedication to this craft. I've tried to respond with the respect this format supposedly deserves. But you don't want respect. You don't want conversation. You want blood. The audience had gone beyond uneasy. Some were filming on their phones, others quietly heading for the exits, unwilling to witness the destruction of two careers in real time. Washington turned toward the cameras, ignoring Colbert entirely. I came here tonight to talk about a film I poured my heart and soul into, a story that matters to me, that I believe matters to audiences who still care about meaningful entertainment. Instead, I've been subjected to a character assassination disguised as an interview. Realizing he was losing control of the narrative, Colbert tried to push back. Character assassination? Denzel, you came on my show. Nobody forced you. If you can't handle a few tough questions about your public statements, maybe you shouldn't make them. Tough questions, Stephen? Washington turned back to him with a look that blended pity and contempt. You haven't asked a single tough question tonight. You've made accusations, hurled insults, and tried to create controversy where none existed. That's not journalism. That's not even good television. That's just sad. The word sad landed like a verdict. Colbert's expression shifted. Anger, confusion, something like shame, before hardening into fury. Sad? You know what's sad, Denzel? A 70-year-old man who can't accept his time is over. Who can't adapt to a world where people don't automatically kneel to movie stars just because they've been around forever. Washington stared at him for a long moment, then shook his head with quiet finality. You're right about one thing, Stephen. My time here is over. He began removing his microphone with deliberate movements. Not because I'm a dinosaur, not because I can't adapt, but because I refuse to participate in this kind of spectacle. I refuse to let my work, my reputation, and my integrity be used as fodder for your need to create viral moments. The studio fell silent. Even Colbert seemed to realize he'd gone too far. Washington placed the microphone on the guest chair with ceremonial weight. I've been in this business for 40 years, he said, his voice carrying the authority of a eulogy. I've worked with legends, newcomers, journalists, comedians, talk show hosts, and everyone in between. I've never walked out of an interview in my entire career. He paused, letting the words settle. But I've also never been treated with such blatant disrespect by someone who claims to represent the best of what this medium can offer. He looked directly at Colbert. You're not the worst interviewer I've ever encountered. Not even the rudest, but you might be the most disappointing. With that, Washington turned and began walking toward the exit. The cameras followed him, capturing every step of what would become one of the most replayed moments in talk show history. The audience sat in stunned silence, some still recording, others simply staring at the wreckage of what should have been a routine promotional appearance. Colbert stood alone, lost for words. For perhaps the first time in his career, Stephen Colbert was completely speechless. As Washington reached the edge of the set, he paused. For what it's worth, Stephen, I hope you figure out the difference between being provocative and being destructive. This industry needs people who can ask tough questions. It doesn't need people who mistake cruelty for courage. And with those final words, Denzel Washington walked off the set of The Late Show, leaving behind a room full of stunned onlookers, a shaken host, and a moment that would be dissected and debated for years. It was television at its rawest, unfiltered, unforgiving, and unforgettable.